Good evening. Welcome to the 13th and final meeting of the Middle School Boundary Advisory Committee. Tonight's meeting is on a digital platform, as you can see, in response to the state's COVID-19 pandemic guidelines. We are live streaming the meeting on the district's YouTube channel, and it will be critical that we all speak clearly and deliberately so that our audience can track what is being said and by whom. This meeting is a public meeting of the Middle School Boundary Adjustment Advisory Committee, and it is being recorded. All meeting materials are available to the public through the posting of those materials on the district's webpage. My name is Stephen Sparks, and I'm the administrator for the Long Range Planning Department of the Beaverton School District. I will continue to facilitate the advisory committee meetings throughout our recommendation process here tonight. We do have other staff who are monitoring the chat room for questions of the committee and are looking for raised hands. We'll be doing our best to share the questions and call on the committee for their comments and questions. If you could advance the PowerPoint to the slide, which showing our agenda, please. Robert, if you could go to the agenda to page 2. Thank you. So tonight, you'll see that our agenda is a little bit different here this evening. We have created an opportunity for the public to submit their names to the district and be called upon for providing testimony to the committee. We'll be bringing those members of the public onto the Zoom meeting here at approximately 6:50 this evening. We, the people who we've invited to provide the testimony have already received an invitation to be here at the meeting, and we will bring them on at the time of testimony. This is a little bit different from our prior meetings in that we wanted to allow the public to testify before the committee began their final deliberations on the final recommendation to the superintendent. Next slide, please. As we do at every meeting, we begin by reviewing the meeting expectations for the boundary adjustment process. So as you can see, the expectations for the meeting are: we assume the best intentions. We all want the best for all of our students. We listen intently to understand better. We are open to considering new ideas. We remain open to influence and are not judgmental. We will consider all options. There are no bad questions. Our interactions will be done with respect, and we will respect opposing viewpoints. As we have noted throughout this process, our committee members represent communities and viewpoints from across the district. They're not here solely to represent a specific school or their own interest. The committee's questions, comments, and ultimately their recommendation will be for the benefit of all students in the district. And I remind everyone here tonight that the committee's action tonight will be a recommendation to Superintendent Grotting. The superintendent with the board will be making the decision on the boundary adjustment. Next slide, please. As we move to the end, I want to remind everyone for the last time on the board objectives for this project. There is the new boundary for the Timberland Area Middle School. We're reducing the number of students at Stoller to approximately 90% of permanent capacity. And I note that this objective is for school year 2021, which is next school year. We're balancing enrollment at other schools, and we're going to consider other minor amendments to other attendance based on actions that we're taking elsewhere in the district. Next slide, please. So in addition to the board's objectives, the committee is evaluating each boundary option by the policy JC factors, which you can see listed here. Those factors these factors all have equal standing, and they are not ranked by priority. These factors are student body composition, current and future availability of space at schools, feeder patterns from elementary, middle to high school, and neighborhood proximity and accessibility. Next slide, please. So you can see here the map that the committee reached their preliminary agreement on, or recommendation on, at the October 8th meeting. You can see these boundaries, they speak for themselves, but let me give everyone a brief overview of what these boundaries are. At the October 8th meeting, the committee had to decide on Mountain View, Meadow Park, Cedar Park, and Highland Park in terms of their boundaries. The linchpin on that discussion was Mountain View. I call attention to the the east side of the Mountain View area, which was the area of greatest discussion, which included what we have been calling Chehalem West. That's the area of Chehalem Elementary School attendance area located west of Murray Boulevard, and then the entire Cooper Mountain Elementary attendance area. An action of the committee back in March noted having all of Cooper Mountain Elementary attending Mountain View. Currently, the northern third approximately of of Cooper Mountain attends Mountain View. The committee received a great deal of testimony in opposition to that move, and at the October meeting, or the October 8th meeting, the committee reversed that recommendation and came to the conclusion that the existing boundaries for Cooper Mountain and Chehalem West will be maintained. So there is no change from today in those specific areas. The next area of extensive discussion was Aloha Huber, and that's the area just north of Farmington Road and borders on the Meadow Park boundary. Currently, Aloha Huber attends Five Oaks, and at the discussion for last week, we had three options. One that showed Aloha Huber going to Highland Park, which was not supported by the committee for a number of reasons. But then it had a proposal where it showed going to Mountain View or to Meadow Park. The committee, in their discussions, determined that the proximity of Aloha Huber to Mountain View supported moving Aloha Huber to Mountain View, as opposed to going to Meadow Park. One of the benefits of Aloha Huber going to Meadow Park was the ability for those Aloha Huber students to maintain their dual language programming, because Meadow Park does have dual language. But the committee, majority of the committee determined that that proximity outweighed that particular benefit. So we have in green there, you can see the Meadow Park boundary, and then the Cedar Park boundary there in pink. Again, I will note for the record that William Walker and that area that we call Chehalem East have been added to the Cedar Park attendance boundary, largely because those are the schools that are attending Beaverton High School, so that there is a clear feeder pattern for those two schools, or at least those students that are in those attendance areas. Lastly, we had a discussion about the legacy program, and we will get to that later in our meeting so that we will have a number of votes and we can share with you some information that we've obviously put in your staff report, in that memorandum that went out yesterday. So next slide, please. So you can see here the preliminary, the next 3 slides are the results of the map that the committee settled on last week. I think the second slide is, one that I definitely want to be sure we all recognize, and this is the our poverty indicators, where you can see that in Five Oaks it's dropped quite a bit, but it also goes up in Cedar Park, Meadow Park, and Mountain View. There's modest, slightly modest increases at Conestoga and at Whitford, but the more obvious changes are there at Meadow Park and Cedar Park. Cedar Park is being created largely because the areas north of 26 have been taken out of its attendance area. What we're seeing at Mountain View and Meadow Park is, well, Aloha Huber being added to Mountain View, and then the remaining areas of Meadow Park, so the areas north of 26 have been taken out, which also contribute to Meadow Park increasing. So having over 50% on the free reduced lunch students in those 2 schools is, frankly, a concern. But at the same time, as we've talked about before, short of doing a busing model where children are sent to schools that are not, anywhere near their neighborhood, is, it's not something that we can sustain. So that is, an important consideration. Next slide, please. So, oops, back the next slide. There you go. And here you can see our feeder patterns for the high schools. The one area that we were talking about in terms of I would call out Timberland area, that helped quite a bit in terms of the Sunset feeder in with Meadow Park. So that has there's still a low number of Meadow Park students that will attend Sunset if you consider the possibility of students opting to go to Beaverton for their dual language if they choose to do that. We do have, unfortunately, the split with Beaverton having 4 schools having that split. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the existing. We fixed the 4 at Beaverton High School, and there's 3 schools or 4 schools that have 3 feeders in there. We weren't able to create one high school for one middle school, so it's better, but there's still certainly going to be students that may feel that they're in the minority in those middle schools. So with that, I would like to see if you have any initial questions that we can answer before we turn over to invite people to come in and provide testimony. David, are you seeing anybody with raised hands? Okay. So with that, I'm going to ask Melissa or Debbie to invite our folks who are testifying to come in. This will just take a moment. Okay, So as our speakers come in, if you could turn on your video and have your computer muted until we call on you to speak. You can see that we have a, well, we did have a clock. Okay, it's back. All right, so going down the list here. Ms. Miles, are you there? I don't see you, but.
Steve?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, looks like she's in. All right.
Okay. All right, well then let's go to the next one. Ms. Sill.
Yes.
If you could please turn your video camera on and we will hear from you first.
Hello.
Hello, please begin when you're ready.
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, please begin.
Good evening. First of all, I would like to thank BST and all the committee members for their extreme hard work and all the volunteer hours that they have so far put forth towards this boundary change adjustment process. It is indeed a very unusual time for all of us, both locally and globally. COVID is teaching us each day that whatever we have taught our kids is not enough. We have to do better as adults, and we have to teach them compassion, integrity, sharing, caring, love, resilience, followed by academic excellence and good grades. Having said that, as adults, our life has not stopped due to COVID. Each and every parent is trying to balance their personal, family, and professional life. Thus, when we come towards the end of this boundary change adjustment process, I would like to reflect on the key factors. First factor was to fill up the new Timberline Middle School, and second factor was reducing population of Stoller, both to meet the board's objective and at the same time address the safety and security of our kids. My request to BST and committee is to make the final recommendation and decision that would address the 7 main factors. First, safety and security, namely by avoiding portables unless it is absolutely required. Quality of education, and by quality, I mean academic, physical, emotional growth. Building capacity, proximity. The fifth factor, long-term viability. 6, budgetary concern, and 7, equity. We as parents hope that the final decision made by the district superintendent will help towards building all communities, irrespective of his or her origin, color, creed, caste. BST has the obligation to fulfill the needs of every community optimally, if not best, without compromising on the safety and security of our kids. And we hope to have a justifiable solution for our kids who were the primary stakeholders of this project. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ms. Sill. All right, Ms. Miles, are you on and ready? Okay, yes, great. If you could unmute yourself and please begin when you're ready.
Hi, my name is Sarah and I have 2 kids in the Cooper Mountain boundary. Thank you to the committee members who continue to recognize that making major changes in the South is not part of your objective. Thank you for your efforts in refocusing on the original objectives and working to find a solution that minimizes the impact to most students. Cooper Mountain is a diverse community that has worked hard to build relationships with its neighbors who are heading to Highland Park and then on to Mountainside. Changing our current feeder pattern will alienate our children from their future high school peers. To the committee members who continue to vote to change Cooper Mountain boundaries, I ask that you consider what is best for Cooper Mountain students. Last week, you refused to create an island for Aloha Huber students and considered their future with their dual language path. Yet not one of you asked about the needs of Chehalem or the Cooper Mountain community prior to your vote. All along, we have been asking for a fair and equal discussion for our community. Achieving a better free and reduced lunch ratio is the only driving force of consideration in the South, and it was hardly considered in the North. But This is because it wasn't the job that you were tasked with. This is the responsibility of state legislators, county commissioners, and city planners. I support equitable education. I support I support additional funding for schools, communities, and in need of more resources. However, I do not support the moving children and communities around to conflate numbers. This will not create real and sustained change. Mr. Smarks, you came to our PTO meeting months ago requesting input from the schools in the South. If this process is sincerely requesting input from the community, please listen to the overwhelming public and online testimony, but not just from Cooper Mountain families, but from Highland Park and Mountainville as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miles. Okay, next is Ms. Fay.
Hi, I'm Susie Fay. I'm from Oak Hills, and my first comments are to represent the entire Oak Hills elementary school community. We just want to express our gratitude to all of you for everything that you have done to consider all of the schools. I know as I've listened to these meetings, you have really put a lot of thought into other schools that aren't your own. I'm thinking of Jason, especially when he mentioned his own school last week. It was really touching that he wasn't able to advocate for it, but I know that he's put a lot of thought into every single school for this district. I especially want to thank you for listening to our request to allow East Oak Hills to go to Timberland and West to go to Five Oaks. If you look at the map proposal, the feeder patterns are much more friendly to our students than they were. We don't particularly like being split at the high school level. However, that isn't your concern. That's a high school boundary issue. And because we need to be split, we're so grateful that we're going to middle schools that will feed nicely into high schools so that we can have our kids can have lots of friends when they get to high school. Personally, not representing the rest of Oak Hills, but I have a lot of concerns about that same issue for other schools, like the last person who just spoke. I'm worried about Jacob Wismer feeling alone at Sunset. I'm worried about the schools in the South. I really hope that you will consider cleaner feeder patterns that allow kids to know the people they go to high school with, if possible in the South, or at least make a proposal to the district that includes the thought that is important. Another thing I want to mention is if you are serious about getting this passed, since making Stoller not hit 100%. Oh, I better stop. I won't talk about SUMA, but thank you. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. All right, next is Ms. Powers.
Hey, I don't have a statement prepared this week. I just wanted to touch on a few things that I didn't get to talk about last week. And I just am really hoping that the committee follows the saying, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, or at least don't let perfect be the enemy of decent. We all know that the best solution would be to redo all of the boundaries at all of the levels, elementary, middle, and high, but that's just not possible right now. The objectives of this were to reduce crowding at Stoller and fill Timberland. And like other speakers have said, it's kind of a bonus to minimize the transitions for everybody else if that's possible. This map allows us to do that. I also wanted to touch on Jason's concern from last week about the current enrollment numbers. We are a family that has decided and chosen to enroll in Flex for this year. And we are always 1 foot out the door for homeschooling, if I'm being honest. But that is not our intent as a permanent solution. I have spoken to many other families that have decided to homeschool for this year, and it is a temporary thing. And I worry about considering those current enrollment numbers too much, because then I think we're going to have a huge influx of students back in. And if we're not prepared for that, it could be really bad, and all schools could be overcrowded, not just the ones in the north. So I think just this map is decent. Make sure we have our priorities in order, especially I touched on last week. Hopefully students that are lower income areas that can walk to a middle school, keep them at that middle school so their attendance isn't affected by their financial circumstances. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, next we have Mr. Relaford.
Hello, thank you so much for giving me a chance to speak today. Want to just state that I have two children at Sexton Mountain Elementary within the middle school boundary discussion. One is 6th grade and one is 7th grade. They both go to Highland Park Middle School. I know it comes as no surprise that strong communities are built around public schools. We as families within these communities value the relationships we develop over the years. We are not Lego pieces, as was referenced in the last couple of meetings. The friendships our kids from middle school sustain them through high school. At Highland, Cooper Mountain, and Nancy Riles are two of the communities that stay with us from 6th through 12th grade. In moving Cooper Mountain to Mountain View, you isolate those students from the majority of the mountainside boundary and majority of the mountainside bound middle schoolers, disrupting existing clean feeder pattern. The southern schools have experienced dramatic high school boundary shift in the last 3 years to fill mountainside. These changes take a toll on communities, and that was before the overwhelming changes in the last 7 months due to COVID. This is a hard time, folks. A really hard time for parents and students. Change is inevitable when needed, but please do not make unnecessary changes in southern school boundaries. You are tasked with a difficult job of redrawing boundaries for the North. During a pandemic, I don't envy you, but please maintain stability for the kids that don't need to move. The hope of seeing their friends at school sustains them through this difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Relaford. Okay, our final speaker tonight is Mr. Kumar. So, Mr. Kumar, when you are ready.
Thank you, Sparks. Yeah, I'm ready.
Please begin.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sandeep Kumar, and I'm here to represent Springville Elementary School. I will start with praying for everyone's health in this hard and different time. I would also like to thank everyone who participated in this process and worked towards this solution. As we all are reaching towards the end of this boundary process, we all need to take a pause and remember this journey where we covered the width and breadth of different issues, both related and unrelated. We discussed everything in detail with the facts and data in hand. We evaluated all the options, created hundreds of maps, voted few, and discarded many. After all these meetings, discussions, deliberation, staff inputs, public comments, and community feedback, we have this current map presented as preliminary recommendation by BST. However we like to describe this map, we all must agree that the current map has survived the tough test of longest time and comprehensive logic in comparison to any other alternative. Today is the day we reflect this thought that the current map is the optimal solution and it is the outcome of the thought process of this committee. It is the time committee members trust their judgment and continue voting the current map like they were doing in the last many meetings. Also, as a staff reports confirmed for this map, it satisfies all the JC and meets the objective as set for this boundary process. There could be minor changes here and there, but there is no scope of major changes when we are at the last meeting. The whole process has been stressful for many communities, and considering the current situation, we must end this in timely manner without any further delay. In the end, I have a suggestion for BSD. The boundary process starts the day when BSD decides that there is a need for new building. So please define JCs and objectives for the process then, so that the location of new building is decided wisely, which meets the same JCs and objectives that the boundary adjustment committee will have to meet for the new boundaries when they set for the meeting. You cannot be at McDonald's and then expect healthy and fresh food. You have to fix the situation at root level. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. Okay, so that's all of the public testimony that we have this evening. Robert, if you would please pull up the PowerPoint on the screen. Our next phase here of today's meeting is there are several issues for the committee to consider and vote on that we haven't talked about in quite a while. One of the issues that was brought up by, I believe it was Michelle last week, was the Hazeldale tail. And this you can see on the screen, in the dashed lines that is currently designated to go to Highland Park. Should it instead feed Mountain View? The idea being that offsetting some of the free reduced lunch numbers would take place by having students in this area, in this newly developed area, attending Mountain View. The area is largely undeveloped right now. There might be a handful of students that exist in there right now. But as development occurs and the area is developed and sold, there will be more students. So next slide, please, Robert. If you consider the capacity issues. So right now, in this top table, you'll see that we have in 2025, we are looking at approximately 800 students. And if we included the Hazeldale tail, it would be approximately 900 students. So we're going from roughly 80% capacity to 90% capacity. That number, we chose 2025 because in 2021, that area isn't ready to be fully developed, and that there will be a lot more students, homes that are built and been sold by 2025. That's the reason why we chose that number. If we look at Highland Park, by keeping it at Highland Park, we're at about 85% capacity and drop down to 75% capacity without the tail. We are at approximately 740 students in 2025 for Hazeldale, with the Hazeldale tail, but it drops down to 635 without the tail. And I remind you that the sweet spot, as Mr. Streckmeyer has noted previously, for middle school is approximately 800 students. It's not a hard and fast rule, but generally that's where the middle schools, we like to have the middle schools be. So with this information, I open up the floor to discussion, questions, any comments, at the end of which we will take a vote on this, and then we will proceed to the next question. So we'll stop there and open the floor to any questions or comments. I'm not seeing anybody wave at the screen. David, do we have anybody on?
Michelle.
Okay, Michelle, yes, please.
Hi, yeah, just to clarify, my bringing up the tail wasn't just for equity purposes. It's also, I think I want to reduce the number of splits, and I think we all kind of agreed with that. And I like the idea of, Cooper Mountain keeps saying we're getting isolated from our mountainside peers, but keeping in mind that there is a section of Chehalem and a section of Cooper Mountain that will go to Mountainside, that will attend Mountain View, and I don't want to further isolate them. I think it'd be nice to add more Mountainside students to Mountain View.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. I'm just making some notes here. It looks like Charisse.
I totally get what you're saying, Michelle, but there are other communities as well that feed Mountainside. So my kids go to Nancy Riles, but they go to the Conestoga part of Nancy Riles, which is tiny, right? Conestoga feeds Mountainside too. It's just one of those big geographical areas. I know for me, the more important part is keeping as many students as close to that 800. I can't see why we would want to put additional over that 800. when we're pulling another school down to 75%. You know what I mean?
I'm sorry, I'm just taking some notes here. So thank you for that. Is there anybody else who would like to comment on this or ask any questions on this? Abhijit.
Steve or Robert, can you highlight on the map what parts of Cooper Mountain and Chehalem are feeding to Mountainside? I think I can see that. I just want to make sure I understand it.
Can you see it? Can you see my cursor?
Yes,
Over here? Okay. So this here is Chehalem West, we call it, which is feeding to Mountainside. And currently feeds to Mountainside and is within the walk zone of, I'm sorry, not Mountainside, Mountain View. It also feeds to Mountainside. And then the other portion, Abhijit, was it Cooper Mountain you wanted to?
Yeah, what part of Cooper Mountain goes to Mountainside?
So Cooper Mountain here, actually all of Cooper Mountain goes to Mountainside High. This portion of Cooper Mountain goes to Mountain View.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, it goes to Mountain View.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, not seeing any, I'm going to call the vote on the Hazeldale Tail. And Robert, if you could just go to that slide for the Hazeldale Tail. Okay, so first question is, should the Hazeldale Tail, as illustrated here in the dashed lined area, should that area be removed from Highland Park and moved to Mountain View as a final recommendation for the boundary map? Any questions about that question? Okay, I am going to go down the list. I'm going to go alphabetical here today on at least the first vote. So Abdul.
Yes.
Abhijit.
Yes.
Charisse.
Just to confirm, you're saying we want to move it.
The question is, should this area be removed from Highland Park and added to Mountain View?
No.
No. Divya.
Yes.
Jason.
Yes.
John.
No.
Christy.
No.
Marnie. I didn't hear you, Marnie. You're still muted. Can't hear you. No. Okay. Thumb down is no. Matt.
No.
Mike.
No.
Michelle.
Yes.
Monica.
No.
Sean.
No.
Okay, and Yasmin is absent, and it looks like the noes have it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 noes, which is a majority. So can we go to the next slide down? One more. Okay. So we talked about this several months ago prior to our delay or our hiatus from the COVID situation. We, under our objectives of allowing to clean up feeders and make some minor, changes or recommend some minor changes, we staff brought to you this particular grid code, moving from Barnes Elementary to Beaver Acres Elementary. We have not come back to you in confirming this particular vote, but you have in the past recommended, and I believe it was in the January meeting, you have recommended to proceed with that boundary change. However, as noted in the staff report, in our review of the dual language enrollment, we note that approximately half of the students that live in this grid code that attend Barnes are participants in the dual language program, which they wouldn't have if they went to Beaver Acres. They would have to do an open enrollment to go over and do that. So with that information, we wanted to be sure that we polled you again on whether or not that is something, that is a recommendation you want to proceed with, if it's something you would like to no longer proceed with. And before we get to the vote, I'd like to open up the floor to any questions, comments before we take that vote. So I open the floor, and David, I'm not seeing any hands, but Marnie, okay?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Did you say, just a repeat, was it over 50% that are enrolled in the English as a second language?
There are 45 students that live in that area, and 22 are enrolled in the dual language.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Abhijit?
Can you clarify again, if we make this call and those kids want to continue dual language, what would be their option? Would it be as is, or would they be guaranteed to be in Barnes, or how will that work?
I'm going to look to Mr. Struckmeyer to help me with that answer.
Good evening. So students currently, by their residence, are able to participate, but as the school at Barnes is going to more school-wide at kindergarten and then at first and rolling up, teaching and learning is trying to ensure that regardless of where students live, that they would have access if the capacity exists at Barnes and at other sites. So the short answer is, currently it depends on residency, but as early as next school year, we hope to have systems in place that allow for opting into dual language, and if the capacity exists, and to ensure that opting in can continue all the way through the senior year of high school. So some of the concerns earlier about Barnes and Meadow and some of those students living within the sunset boundaries, we're doing our very best to make sure we have pathways for that to be cleaned up.
And sorry, Steve, just one follow-up. So if these Beaver Acres students were to go to Barnes, as Mr. Struckmeyer said, I assume they would also be guaranteed transportation, or how will that work?
Yes, our current practice is that if students are participating in an options program, that transportation is provided by the district.
Thank you.
Charisse.
Stephen, can you please refresh our memories as to why we were looking at this particular grid code? Was it feeder pattern?
It was feeder pattern, it was transportation, it was proximity to Beaver Acres, where these students will get on a bus and drive by the closest elementary school. Okay, Jason, I see your hand, but before you, we have Monica and then Jason.
I'm assuming that we could potentially put right in a legacy for those children that are already in dual language, assuming they weren't able to opt in for whatever reason. Because my concern is, I have children in dual language. We're not English as a second language. It's an immersive program. My kids are learning everything in Spanish. If they were, for whatever reason, not able to get into Barnes, then that would seriously affect, if they went into an English classroom, it's just a different curriculum. So are we able to write some sort of legacy in should that opting in not be an option for those families.
We can do that. Yes, we could accommodate that. Jason.
I had exactly the same question and concern.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So any other discussion, questions about this area and this subject? Michelle.
So I just want to make sure I understand correctly. Would you only offer the option to attend dual language for the kids in that grid code? Because these Beaver Acres kids are sandwiched between two schools that have the immersion program, but if they're a block away, then they wouldn't have the option, or would they all have the option?
I'll call on Mr. Struckmeyer to respond on how to enroll in dual language, but specific to this grid code, it would be moving those students to Beaver Acres. And then the next question would be, is there a legacy for those 22 students or not?
Right. So there's a couple of questions there wrapped up. I'm going to try to get both of them, Michelle, and if I don't, please let me know. The first is, how do you start in a dual language? Again, residency in the neighborhood is one way. And then we have practices in place that if students come in with Spanish skills, for example, and they want, a family wants their child to have more academic Spanish, or then they would contact the school that has dual language. And if there is capacity, we have practices in place where those students can do an administrative transfer to be able to participate in that program. There's been some changes to our admin transfer process over the last few years that have made that a little more complicated or challenging. But generally our practice is, once a student is in, then even if they left the Barnes boundaries, and let's say they were living in Cooper Mountain boundaries, then through the administrative transfer process, that student would be allowed to continue as long as they were there in elementary school. So the question is it possible you would have kids a block away that have capacity, that would be in or out? The capacity of the school would sometimes mean yes, because if they don't have room to take in kids from outside their catchment or their neighborhood boundaries, then the answer might be no. But generally, we try to make the answer yes.
Okay. I'm looking at the hands here. It looks like, Monica, you were first.
I just wanted to follow up, especially on that point, because I think right now, all of the Beaver Acres population could potentially opt in to Barnes Spanish if they want. That's my understanding for all opt-in school programs such as dual language. But specifically, that grid code, could they get priority over other opt-ins since their kids have already been in the program? That's specifically the concern that I wanted to make sure.
If we were to offer a legacy program to those students, they would have priority as if they were, still enrolled in Barnes. Okay, Abhijit.
Hey, I wanted to follow up on a question that Cherry's asked. So you said the grid codes, the motivation to move the grid code is mainly distance and transportation, and they are passing by the near school to go to Barnes. If half of them are in dual language and are already going to Barnes, and maybe 50–60% opt in, what do we gain by this move in terms of transportation? Your comments?
I will ask Mr. Beaver to respond to that, but generally speaking, it would be, instead of a full bus, it would be perhaps a half full bus. Mr. Beaver.
Well, not even that. Actually, we've looked at that, and that's one of those islands, if you will. Although it's contiguous, it's almost its own island because of the speed limit and the volume of traffic on 173rd. Those kids can't cross the street to catch the bus going north. So we have to run a different bus, a separate bus running south that attends Barnes to pick up those kids only in basically 1 or 2 bus stops and take them in. So they have the longest ride essentially for Barnes. both in the morning and in the afternoon, whereas it's a walk distance to Beaver Acres. And if memory serves me, I believe there's an active path right there now. And if there's not, I know that it's on the list to be completed shortly. But essentially, so for those 22 kids that don't attend it, now they're walking to Beaver Acres instead of spending 30 minutes on a bus or 35 minutes on a bus to go to school. So there's an advantage there, and it allows us to eliminate a significant portion of a Barnes route as well. So that's the answer.
Yeah, thank you. That was really helpful. Thanks.
Okay, Michelle, looks like you had your hand up first.
And then are we also talking about moving the high school boundary over? Because if I'm seeing this map correctly, that's a Beaverton High School zone, right? And if we move them to Beaver Acres, we want to move them to Aloha as well?
Robert, I'm going to look to you on that specific.
Yeah, you're correct. It would make sense to do a high school adjustment as well for that grid code. That's the farthest west portion of Beaverton High School.
Okay. Charisse.
I just want to be very crystal clear about the students that are already in the dual language program. So we move this, the ones that are not can now walk to Beaver Acres, but the ones that are will be provided transportation, and because they were in the program, will be allowed to stay in it. Is that accurate?
Under a legacy situation, they would need to opt in to remain in that dual language program. And as I understand from Mr. Beaver, that transportation would still be provided to go to Barnes. Okay, Divya.
I'm concerned about what Michelle has brought up about the high school. How far, which is the nearest high school for these children? Is it Aloha or is it Beaverton High School? And are they bused either way?
It would be Aloha High School.
Today they are in Beaverton High School, right? But we are not proposing a high school adjustment here.
We haven't proposed one, as Robert noted just a moment ago, that in doing this, it would make sense to have it as a part of Barnes that feeds into Aloha, to have all those students feed into Aloha.
Okay. Okay. And then are we going to amend our vote to include both elementary and high school adjustments?
Well, that's the vote that we'll bring to you as soon as we're done with the conversation here.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Looking at the list here, I don't see any other hands up. I didn't see anybody wave their hand. Okay, Abdul's waving his hand. Okay, Abdul, please.
Yeah, just a comment here. I just want to be sure I'm understanding this. So the students in that grid code right now are being transported to Barnes. But if we do move them to Beaver Acres, then they might walk, or at least they have a shorter path to Beaver Acres. But we will still be providing that transportation to Barnes, right?
Right.
And what you're suggesting is a legacy option, which means that would continue for a few years. And from what has been said earlier, if we do allow opt-in and there's this administrative system, then we still would have to bus students, even if it were one student from that grid code, all the way to Barnes, right?
Mr. Beaver.
Busing would be applicable to the legacy students. So you're right. So it would be for the next 4 years, right? 4 to 4 years. I don't think kindergarten's part of that. After that 4 years is over, that last child, that last grade goes, gets done with Barnes and moves on to the middle school, then the busing ends. If other students in the meantime had opted in, had opted for that and were chosen to attend, and they live there, they could certainly use that bus since it's already stopping there. But once that last legacy student moves on out of Barnes, the transportation stops, and that student would then have, that second student would then have to find their own way to school because they are a administrative transfer. So the busing is guaranteed to the legacy students, not to anybody after other than the legacy students.
Okay. All right.
So to provide a little additional context, so using the example of somebody in the next grid code over, if they opt in and do an admin transfer to Barnes to do the dual language today, they would still need to provide their own transportation. Is that correct, Mr. Beaver?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
So
thank you.
That grid code would have an extra benefit for 4 years, and then would be like everybody else in the Barnes or the Beaver Acres attendance area, vis-a-vis the dual language and transportation. Christy.
Yes, I wanted to just confirm the benefit of moving them from Barnes Elementary to Beaver Acres is to help with transportation. Is that really the main driver for this change?
It's also a quality of life issue for the 22 students that don't attend the dual language program at Barnes. It drastically reduces the time they need to travel to get to their home school. So it's a benefit for both. It's a kind of a win-win. It benefits the students that don't attend the Barnes program in that they can get to school quickly, but it still benefits the legacy students because they're still provided transportation.
So here's my concern with that my concern is that, I don't know what the socioeconomic, status is of this particular area, but my concern is if we move this to Beaver Acres, now this complicates their process, that grid code's process to join the dual language. It requires them to opt in. And then what happens when it goes to the middle school process? Are they still opt in? And then they have to find their own transportation. This doesn't sit well with me.
With respect to the middle school, this is still in the Meadow Park attendance area. So it really is an elementary and then a high school question.
Right. And so then in high school, they would be going to Aloha or they'd have to get an administrative transfer to go to Beaverton?
Mr. Struckmeyer, does Aloha have the dual language?
I can't speak authoritatively about this year's staffing, but yes, they have had staffing from the multilingual department to offer dual language courses for the past several years. I believe that they do this year, but I would want to double check before I said that was accurate.
Right. Okay, Mike.
Steve, have any parents in this grid code requested this change that you're aware of?
No. This is entirely a staff identified edit. Okay. All right. Anybody else before we call the question? Any last questions, comments? Okay, so here's the question I'm going to call, and it has phases or bits of it. So I'll try to be very clear. The motion is, does the committee support moving this grid code from Barnes Elementary to Beaver Acres Elementary, allowing a legacy program to exist for those students who are currently in the dual language program at Barnes, who would receive transportation from this, who would continue to receive transportation from this grid code to Barnes. And finally, this grid code move from Beaverton High School to Aloha High School. So those are the, it's one question, but those are the three parts of that one question. Any questions? Okay, so I am going to go in reverse alphabetical order on this one. Sean.
Yes.
Monica.
No.
Michelle.
No.
Mike.
No.
Matt.
No.
Marnie.
No.
Christy.
No.
John.
No.
Jason.
Steve, I think it makes a ton of sense. It strikes me as not something that's part of this process. I encourage you to pursue it through the other targeted boundary adjustments you guys make sometimes, so no.
Divya.
No.
Charisse.
I'm with Jason. No.
Abhijit. I didn't get that, Abhijit.
Sorry, I said no.
And then Abdul.
No.
Okay. No's have it. Okay, next slide, please. So this area right here in the red dashed line, when we were talking about Findlay and Stoller and Springville and walkability and the like, we were looking at 3 grid codes immediately south of Stoller Middle School. And the committee recommended the boundaries as you see them, but also recommended that in the future, whether it's next year, presumably, or another time, that the district should initiate a boundary adjustment process, a public process, to look at the boundaries specifically in these 3 grid codes to see if the Findlay area should be modified to allow those areas that are walkable to Stoller, if they should be added to another elementary school, particularly or specifically Jacob Wismer. The committee agreed and supported that motion, and I believe that was at the February meeting. The question here now is to return to confirm or reverse that particular vote. You've received testimony on this, written and oral testimony on this particular recommendation. You heard some this evening. So I would like to call that question, but before we do, I wanted to allow the committee to have the floor to talk about it. And I see one hand for Charisse, then Jason. Charisse, then Jason.
We received a lot of testimony about this from this community, and I don't recall any of it being positive for this change. I think the majority of the community told us to leave this alone. All of that said, I think that all of our boundaries need to be looked at, but I don't feel comfortable recommending only this boundary adjustment without a broader look across the entire district. So I know that that is not what we were talking about right here, but I think that's something that if we're only going to look at this little piece, the community's been really clear with us that this is not anything they want, and we would need some very good rationale to do it.
So from that, Charisse, I am going to take that you volunteer for the district-wide boundary adjustment that we will do in the future. So congratulations, you're our first. Jason.
So on this one, end of the day, I don't know that I have a strong opinion. I do recall, though, I feel a bit of whiplash as far as the public commentary, because at the start of this, I recall quite a bit of public commentary demanding that they be able to just sort of walk across the street. And in that regard, though, I said when I voted for this, it was a vote for a process, not necessarily an outcome of that process. And I would certainly hope that if there was a process that, just like we considered for this other elementary school adjustment, there would be an option for complete grandfathering. I think there's real benefits to reducing the transportation costs, but I don't think it's worth disrupting anybody who's in school.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else on this particular item? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to call the question. Oop, I've now got some hands, sorry. All right, Christy.
Yeah, I agree with Charisse. I mean, we've heard a lot of feedback recently about that vote, and I haven't seen any of it that's been positive. So I think we need to readjust that. Or we need to not readjust those boundaries.
Okay, Divya?
Yeah, so I voted no for this early on as well, and I still hold that recommendation. The point I would like to bring to attention is Stoller is at 100% 21, and it's going to only go up in the next 5 years. So why would we want to add more students there? If Findlay was all in, then yeah, maybe that's a different story. But now that it's going to Timberland, I do not support splitting Findlay. And this is a very flowing community. And it would be weird to have few houses in one school and few houses in the other school.
Thank you. Anybody else? Matthew, you are up.
Yeah, just to echo that, we voted on this based on the feedback. I feel like we were influenced by the feedback we had from the community, and to echo the point of Divya, we're trying to reduce the load at Stoller, so it makes sense that we just stick with what we voted for to begin with.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else before I call the question? All right, seeing none. Here is the question being asked. Does the committee want to continue to recommend to the board and the superintendent to have an elementary school boundary adjustment process in this area as noted on the map? So basically, it's a question, do you want to continue to make the recommendation? Any questions on that? Okay. So I will start this time with Christy.
No.
Okay, Marnie.
No.
Matt.
No.
Mike.
No.
Michelle.
No.
Monica.
No.
Sean.
No.
Abdul.
No.
Abhijit.
No.
Charisse.
No.
Divya.
No.
Jason.
No.
John.
No.
Okay, the noes have it. All right, so our next and final boundary discussion is the overall map. And the question there is going to be simply, do you, the committee, recommend the map as you had preliminary concluded last week? And Robert, if you could please go to the October 8th map. And after this vote, we will go to the question about the legacy questions. So, Robert, did we have a bigger map above, or is this the complete map? Only one.
This is what we have in the PowerPoint. I could pull up a PDF or something. Do you want to use this?
No, no, this is good. We can use this.
Okay.
Okay. So before I call the question, I see your hand, Sharice. Before we call the question, the recommendation that the committee made, the preliminary recommendation that the committee made last week is, as noted, is reflected up here on the screen. This is the map. The question we're going to ask is, does the committee want to recommend this map as is? Now, before we call the question, there will be a discussion period that you can ask any questions, make any observations, or even make different motions. So, for example, if somebody wanted to make a change to this map, that would need a second and then a vote of the committee to do. All right. So as we noted over the past couple of meetings, there have been several questions on changes to recommendations. And for lack of a second, or because we didn't have enough votes, those did not get approved. Okay. And I'm seeing Abdul get up to stretch his back, and I sense that this item is going to require some extensive conversation. So, and I'm also seeing some people rub their eyes. Do you want to take a break at this point, or do you want to take a break after voting on this map? What's your pleasure?
Now.
No what?
No, now.
Break?
Now.
We can break now.
Let's take it now.
Okay. Looking at the screen and making sure you're not swatting at flies, raise your hand if you want to break now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we're plowing ahead. So here's the question. Well, I've just described what the question will be. So at this point, I'm opening up the floor to any questions, comments, suggestions, motions, whatever you may have on this matter, on this map. So, Sharice, I saw your hand first.
Can you please load the current enrollment for these areas as is so that we can see them for 2021, 2025? Is there a way to put that on the PowerPoint so that people watching can see it?
Yeah, give me a second.
Okay. While Robert is doing that, Divya.
You didn't think that would be that easy, did you, Stephen?
No, not with this group. So Divya.
Yeah, I had a question on the map. I think if it's up here, it is helpful because I wasn't clear how the SUMA kids were split between Timberland and Stoller. So if you can talk through the numbers for Timber and Stoller, that would be helpful.
The table that Robert is retrieving will show where, the numbers of those options and special programs students.
Yeah, so the 100% in 21, does that include the SUMA kids from Timberland boundary as well in Stoller? That's the part I wasn't clear.
So it only includes the students that are in the Stoller attendance area.
So what is the option for the Timberland kids? Where would they go, the SUMA kids from Timberland boundary?
That would have to be determined by the teaching and learning department. Jason.
Okay.
Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So I'd love to get to the end of this meeting tonight and be able to say yes on the map. And in fact, I've got an idea on maybe more than one yes for all of us. But I've got some concerns, but let me start off with really the proposal, because I think we've got to acknowledge that, as you noted up front, this has been a long process, and we're in a very different set of circumstances than we were, 13 months ago. And as I think about the alarming drop in enrollment numbers, and really the fact that we haven't factored them in here, what I understand to be corresponding budget concerns, and really also being very mindful that in the best of times, as we've seen, these boundary processes are very stressful on families and on students. And last meeting, we started with a very sad reminder of that we have to be extra mindful in these circumstances of mental health. And then the district's had a whole week of focus on mental health. And so we've bandied about some options to what I might call an alternative, but a motion I would like to make, and I'm going to end up with 4 motions, so pace yourself. But one I would like to make that I hope is not terribly controversial is that I would like to recommend to the district that unless they can express a high degree of confidence that any boundary changes they make at this time will be in effect for 8 years, that we recommend they do not make a change at this time and instead pursue some temporary option with Stoller and Timberland. And I pick 8 years with this mindset. A kindergartner starting today, in 8 years, will have completed 7th grade. In the event there's another boundary adjustment, they would presumably be grandfathered in. And I think it's pretty reasonable to say to ask the district to express that level of confidence to the community of, hey, we know the students going to stay, you can count on where they're going to be at least through middle school. And again, everyone's got different opinions on the confidence of how things get back to normal or some semblance of normal. And I'd like to think that with this recommendation, both parties could be satisfied. So that's one motion. Getting into concerns with the specific map. Some things I would like to see to be able to really confidently support this. In my mind, we've done this, been at this a long time. Things took a wrong turn at that final meeting in March. And two sides of it. One is, if you look at the maps that were leading up to that final meeting over at the Five Oaks Meadow Park split, we had the task at hand, of course, is take kids out of Stoller and then adjust, because there's no Timberland involved in that side, and then also adjust attendance boundaries as necessary. We had an option, and it was on there for several maps, to take Rock Creek, keep them paired with Bethany and Oak Hills, which I think was exactly the right thought process, and put them into Meadow Park, which is currently underpopulated. And we didn't have to actually touch Five Oaks at all. But in that meeting, things shifted very abruptly, and we instead of impacting just Rock Creek, we chose to bring in the elementary schools. We end up actually reassigning 4 full elementary schools and then 2 splits of Oak Hills and El Monica. So we had a solution that could have subjected roughly 250 kids at Rock Creek to a change, and likely maybe a compensatory change with the SUMA program at Meadow Park. And with the solution in this map, we're impacting 950 in that area. And it just doesn't, with the mindset of how impactful this is on families, all these families that are now going to be subject to grandfathering, to being split off from the community. Again, we're taking Five Oaks that could have been left alone, and we're breaking it into 3 pieces. Some are now at Meadow, some are left at Five Oaks, some are down at Mountain View. And I look at it and say, well, maybe there was a good reason to do this. I actually feel really good about Aloha Huber Park. We've given them a much shorter commute. They're going to be with some adjacent neighbors. That one I feel good about. But, you know, it would have been nice. It was a way to fix the unreasonably high percentage of free and reduced lunch at Five Oaks. We did, but now we have the same percentage existing over at Meadow. Meadow is underpopulated, well below the 800 threshold we have. And Beaver Acres, we've moved from currently they're assigned to their second closest school over to their third closest school. So I just feel like it's too much change in the community that I don't feel was warranted by the mandate we had from the board, which was to only adjust attendance boundaries as necessary related to Stoller and Timberland.
So Jason, let me interrupt you there before you go to your next suggestion. There's a question on the chat about having separate motions. We're taking notes, and there will be separate motions for each, not only of Jason, but anybody else who offers up something. So Jason, please proceed.
Thank you. So I'll wrap this up by saying, for that motion, I would phrase it as such, that we revert the changes related to Five Oaks and Meadow Park, and have Rock Creek enter the current Meadow Park boundary, but I do not, and leave Five Oaks unchanged other than the previously passed change for Aloha Huber Park. That would be my motion on this one. Jumping across to Cedar Park and Timberland. And I think from the very start, I've been raising my concerns about the extreme proximity of the schools over in that area, in particular Timberland and Cedar Park. I can't say how many times I've raised the problematic scenario of if you take 3 of those 4 elementary schools in the greater Cedarville area and separate them, you've taken now 60% of the population out of Cedar Park, and you've really left West TV as an orphan. And so brought this up again and again. I fully acknowledge that I didn't get much response from fellow committee members, but the way those maps were looking leading up to that March meeting, it was staring us right in the face, because the numbers at Timberland were always over capacity when we were weighing where that SUMA program was going to be. What changed very abruptly in that meeting was we were told, hey, no more discussion of SUMA. That's going to be a teaching and learning decision. Well, okay, as an aside, the whole notion of now 90% at Stoller can no longer be our problem. Because the task we started out with is we need at least 800 at Stoller. We can't be more than 973 to hit our target. This year, we've got 437 SUMA students up there. So if we've got no say over those 437, there's no way any change we can make can be counted on to hit those numbers. But getting back to the split now between Cedar and Timberland, as a result of having that question taken out of our hands, it also just ended the discussion of in any way trying to preserve space at Timberland for the SUMA students that might currently not be able to attend SUMA at Stoller, and therefore the configurations we saw just kind of went into effect like that. And the result, as I've noted many times, you've got a big imbalance between Cedar and Timberland that are right next to each other. You've got under 700 kids at Cedar, Timberland's at 90 to 95% in a bigger capacity. You've got 12% free and reduced lunch. You've got 42% free and reduced lunch at Cedar, and West TV is isolated. We did a great job over on the west side of the district, paying attention and saying, hey, we can't leave Rock Creek in an island. Right now we've got West TV in an island. So I'm gonna pause there and say, I'm gonna repeat what I think is the best thing in the interest of the district. And this will be my third motion. I expect nobody to go for it. No one to second for it because I brought it up before. And that is that we take Bonnie Slope and keep it at its current assignment that it's been for decades at Cedar Park, It will provide a much better balance of population between those two schools. It was a closer, but certainly not a balance of the free and reduced lunch numbers. It will also avoid having there be one school left out in that greater Cedar Mill area, in terms of, three are at one school, one is at another. Again, I don't expect anyone to go for that. You haven't thus far. In that case, my fourth motion is this. I would like the committee to be consistent in your approach. And again, avoid the island at West TV. What's written today in this document that you produced, Steve, says, while West TV Elementary School may be closer to Timberland School, Stoller needs to move more students out to another middle school. Findlay Elementary School students will occupy the space at Timberland School that may have otherwise been utilized by West TV Elementary students. That's actually not true if we accept the directive we were given to not think about SUMA. There are noted 846 resident students in this map at Timberland. It only doesn't have space for West Walton View if you then assume that the 198 students are going to be housed in that building. And again, we were told that was no longer our call. We certainly proceeded at Stoller as if we were going to have no debate about where the SUMA kids would be placed. So all I'm asking for is some consistency in keeping West Walton View with its neighbors at Timberland. So we're not left out on an island, which we've been good about fixing in Rock Creek, and which, as I understand it, is the reason nobody wanted to move Bonnie Slope. You didn't want to create another island. Let's please just be consistent.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to all this. I bet you all wish you'd taken a break earlier. Those are my four motions. Okay.
So I'm looking at the clock. We have 4 minutes to 8 o'clock, and I'm going to insist on a break. I've been taking notes on what you've been saying, Jason, and we will come back and vote on those motions. I do see that Sharice has her hand up. Sharice, is this a question, or is this going to be a lengthy statement where I'm going to regret calling on you before our break?
No, it's more a question of, do we want to have comment after our break, or do we want to see if there are any other motions we want to bring before?
So what we'll do is we will take a break and we will continue our discussion, and we will continue to take motions for any other additional ideas. So for those who are watching and for those who are participating here, time is 7:57. We will return at 8:10. All right, welcome back. We are live and we are going to proceed. So I ask all our committee members to turn on their video so we can pay attention to what you have to say and can see you as you participate. I do have a couple of hands up, and I just want to do a quick overview of how we're going to proceed here. We do have 4 motions from Jason, which I'm going to call here in a moment. But before we do, I wanted to allow folks who have any questions before we call them to have that discussion. So the first hand I had here in return is Abhijit. So Abhijit, please start us off.
Thank you, Steve. This is to acknowledge Jason's feedback. And Jason, I want to say we hear you. I think even in the last committee meeting, we heard your feedback. And I also want to add that you have given this committee a lot of good feedback throughout the process, and we have actually built on this. We all have had the time to request for data and propose maps and get public testimonial from that, and we have built on that. Anything we do right now that requires a mapping exercise, if you will essentially require us to go back to public feedback. And that feedback loop, as we saw, takes time. And we have to acknowledge the other fact that we literally used to get thousands of comments in a 2-week time. And now within a month, we maybe get 20. So people's engagement has also decreased. So all the points that you raised, we could have had that discussion earlier. And like I said, we had mini maps and we had discussed, is it really fair to make motions that actually require us to do mapping or that will take us back to mapping? So Steve, my sincere request would be perhaps to make a motion that let's acknowledge where we are in the process and not entertain motions that will require us to go through a remapping process. We really need to come up with a recommendation today. That would be my first motion. And the second one I also want to highlight is we have seen this in public feedback, and we have paid a really close attention to poverty areas, economically disadvantaged areas, and we have tried to do the right thing in most cases where we could. I'm afraid we might make rash decisions, and I think it was in Ms. Power's feedback as well. So my second motion would be, when it comes to Stoller and Timberland, to not touch economically disadvantaged areas, because we have never heard from them. We will never hear from them. And given that even with the most involved people, we are hearing less and less, we should not touch that. I think that's really what I would request. We should acknowledge the time where we are and proceed carefully.
Okay.
Thank you.
Charisse.
Quite a few things. One, and mainly, I would like to put a motion on because, and almost before Jason's, because before we even talk about anything else, I want to know if this committee is willing to look at Stoller, because we have not filled our board objectives. We were given objectives to make Stoller at 90% occupancy. We've been told over and over again from teaching and learning that we need to assume that those resident students that are SUMA students are going to Stoller. We haven't hit it. We have not fulfilled our objectives. There's too many kids at Stoller. End of story. So if the committee is willing to look at that, we never made that hard decision. We just didn't do it. We took an easy way out at Stoller. But if the committee's not willing to look at it, then everything that Jason just talked about is things that we need to look at. But to Abhijit's point, we haven't heard from some pretty key communities. And for whatever reason, if those communities cannot come to these meetings, there's likely valid reasons for that. And the district needs to go out and find that feedback. And that may be a larger process that is a bit more labor intensive. we need to redraw the whole district. We all know this. We all have been given an incredibly difficult task to do because we've been given the middle of something where the ends are not perfect. But so Stephen, I guess my point is the committee willing to relook at making Stoller hit the objectives? And if we're not, that changes for me how I would vote on future things. So whatever you want to do with that info.
Thank you. Divya.
So mine is not a motion, but more of asking for BSD to respond to the query I had put in at the last meeting. I know that the SUMA Kids is a learning and teaching teaching and learning department's call, but we have to be given some options to work with. 430 kids, not knowing where they would go. Timberland don't know what the options are. It's a very big wild card, and it makes me very uncomfortable to vote on the map, but we've gone through the process. I have faith in the process, but I would need feedback from them. And I've asked for this last time. I didn't get a response back. I just need to know what are the options on table. Don't need a decision, but a directional feedback.
Okay, and I see John with your hand up.
Yeah, just briefly, I agree with everything Abhijit said, so I'm not going to repeat. Jason, I think you've brought a lot of great points. I think we've listened to many through the year, through the process, through the year, the 13 months. Sharice, I appreciate your points as well. However, I would characterize it differently. I think we went through an imperfect process to come up with a slightly imperfect map. And I've done the very best we can with the data that we have and the situation we have and where the schools are physically located to get as close as we can to a good map. And I feel good about the map. I feel good about the process. It's imperfect. It doesn't hit our objectives perfectly, but we have progress toward something I can stand behind. So I would say no to all of the motions on the table so far, other than just to move forward with the vote on the map.
Okay, thank you. So Matt, I see your hand up.
Sorry, I can't find the hand raising button. Yeah, I would, you know, I hear what everybody has said tonight and throughout this whole experience. We were given direction. We worked with what we had. We shuffled it up. I mean, the multitude of maps that we went through. And I'm kind of the same mindset as John is, you know, our task was to give a recommendation. And we've gone through this period of time, and I'm not quite sure how many more meetings we had than we would have had if we didn't have the COVID. But what I'm hearing is that, you know, these motions are to kind of keep going. We know the district needs to be, you know, maybe it needs to, all the boundaries need to be changed. We know that. That's not our mandate. Our mandate, our direction was to do what we could. We did it with what we had, and we've gotten as close as we can to a recommendation that we can give to the board. So I too would not entertain any of the motions.
Okay, thank you. So David, before I call on you, Abdul, but David, I'm looking at the participant list and I see Sharice and Abhijit. Are those new or are those former? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go with Abdul, Jason, then Abhijit.
Thank you. So not to rehash everything that's been said by Abhijit, John, and Matt, I think we've gone through this process and we've come to somewhat a good solution or a decent solution. And going with the feedback or the testimony we had today, we shouldn't, in the sake of a perfect or in the search of a perfect solution, throw away something that's good. So I'm looking at our objectives. It's been said repeatedly that we've not met our Stoller objectives. I, for one, I believe we have, because it says approximately 90%. So 100% is still approximately 90%. And I'm looking at the district. I had a question probably at the first meeting or second meeting, and I said, are we going to use some portables? Was it with that, right? And you're looking at the utilization numbers here. If we're looking at portables, it brings it down to 79%. We all know it's not perfect. We shouldn't use portables, and we can go back and forth on that. But if it means using just a little of that, and I think we've kind of hit that some ways. I believe we've used different strategies along this process, and at some point we decided to lock down certain decisions, and we started making votes probably 3 or 4 meetings ago, and we kind of went from the south, worked our way up. I think with the approach we did is a good thing, and that's left us with this option. So it's not that we didn't really take a decision on Stola. I think it's more of the fact that we decided to handle other things that were, would I say, going to be least impacted from the decisions of Stola first, and kind of work our way up that way, which I think is not a bad approach here. So looking back at our votes too, I want to think that this committee, although we might sound like we are all on different pages, most of the times our votes have been, on one side on issues. We've not really had too many 7-7, 7-8 votes. So to a large extent, I think we majorly as a group agree on a lot of things. So I want to encourage us to move forward with this. I think if we were to start afresh and say we want to withdraw it, we'll come to a different stalemate. So I think what we have here is good enough, and I think we should proceed with what this recommendation we have today.
Thank you, Abdul. Jason, you were next.
So just to touch base on a couple of things I've heard. I believe, I actually would describe it as the objective of 90% is, in all fairness to us, no longer applicable if, given, as Divya pointed out, we have no hint about where those SUMA students are, and we're told not to really offer further opinion. But again, when our target was 137, we had a range of 137 to try and hit to meet the objectives, but we've got no idea about 400 and some. There's not much we can do. And I will say, Sharice, I have a different understanding. I don't believe the district said we have to assume they'll be at solar. I heard they're going to make a decision and we don't need to weigh in on it. But I would say the fact that you and I have very different opinions of what we've heard is itself a symptom of the problem and of the way in which we were handicapped. I would just point out to folks a couple of thoughts. The second and third motions I raised are large changes in the map. Particularly on the second one, rather than just say we shouldn't go forward. Again, 250 versus 950 families disrupted. I think those 700 families deserve an answer of why. The first motion is really above and beyond anything having to do with the map. I don't think it's anything we've treaded over. Again, all I need is somebody to second it to take a vote. And I think, goodness gracious, if the current situation that our species finds itself in doesn't merit a pause, and let's think if we should have some allowances for it, I don't know what would. And I would just reiterate that fourth motion, I'm talking about, I don't know if I mentioned this number earlier, the calculation we got in this process were 121 middle school students at West TV. That's all this change. That's all that motion entails, is moving 121. And by the way, we're talking about a school that just lost 20% of its enrollment, so it's not even 121. I would really appreciate if we could bring that to a vote. Again, it's just a matter of being consistent and also correcting some inconsistency which currently exists in our recommendation document. Thank you.
Okay, Abhijit.
Sorry, I was looking at previous map. So I wanted to address the point that Joyce mentioned and just wanted to throw my thoughts in there. In this very forum, we did ask the district about, hey, are you giving us a constraint that says, make sure Stoller Summa is in Stoller and then reach 90%. All of us also received a call from Superintendent Don and asked him the same thing. And we got the answer from Steve. We got the answer from Don. That's not the intent, right? And just like everybody else has the frustration, I share the same, but we were told the Summa program decision is not ours, it's teaching and learning department. When you do that, in the numbers that Robert is sharing, if you look at the net resident students, that's the number without Summa. And if you look at the grand total attending, that's the number with Summa. So when you have a case where Summa can either be at Stoller or Summa can be out of Stoller or part of it, you got to look at both numbers. So if we only look at the number with Summa, that's only telling half the story, right? If I look at net resident students, it does meet the board objective. It is actually at 84% and 101% in 2025. If we look at grand total attending, then it does not meet, and 100% is approximate, like Abdul said. So my point is, like others have said, we were given a problem. Some decisions were taken out of our hands. When that is done, you got to look at both the things that are on the table. And in my view, this map does meet that objective. So it's not entirely true that we haven't met. And I agree the thing that John summarized in the email, that every one of us has voted on a middle school boundary map that did not go with the majority. I think all of us can say some of our votes lined with majority, some of us did not line with majority. But I trust the process, and we have done a really good job of going through all the data. And I would like to, for myself, hold up my end of the bargain and go ahead with the end voting. That's what I would like to say. Thank you.
All right. Not seeing any additional hands here, and I'm going to now describe how we're going to proceed and with this vote. I have 4 motions from Jason. I have a motion from Charisse, and depending on how those motions go, we may have motions from Abhijit to consider. I understand those of you who have said, hey, let's go ahead and proceed. Under Robert's rules, we're going to proceed with these motions, and if they don't pass, then we move on and we will get to the recommendation on the map. I want to be really clear. This is the committee's final meeting. There is no more meetings. We are not going to extend the process. We have to come to an end here tonight. And if that end is a no recommendation based on the votes that you're going to be taking here in a moment, then that's what it is. We have to get to an end with a board adoption this year. We have it scheduled for November and December for the board to consider the superintendent's decision and whether or not the objectives were met. So just to be clear. Okay, so the first motion I have here is from Jason is do not proceed with the boundary amendments unless the district has confidence for an 8-year period on the projections for enrollment.
Sorry, Steve.
Yeah.
Confidence, 8-year period that the boundaries, any boundary change passed would remain in effect for 8 years.
Gotcha. Okay. So as amended, that the middle school boundaries will not change for 8 years, that the district has that confidence that it will not change for 8 years. And if we do not have that confidence, then do not do the boundary adjustment. Okay, so I know, Jason, you have made that motion, so I've put you down as a yes. Going alphabetically, Abdul. Oh, actually, you know what, John, you are absolutely right. I see your comment. I was rushing. John's comment on the chat is, should we not go for a second? You're absolutely right. I skipped over that. So you heard the motion. Does anybody second the motion? Okay, seeing none. So that dies for no motion. Okay, the second motion was have Olive Rock Creek, Olive Bethany, Oak Hills go to Meadow Park Middle School, and Five Oaks remain the same without Aloha Huber attending. Okay, that's the motion. Is there a second to that motion?
I'm sorry, can I say something unrelated? Sean said she got kicked out and can't get back in.
Oh.
I'm in now. Okay. I'm not sure what happened. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Sean, since you missed that motion, I'll restate it. The second motion is Rock Creek, Bethany, Oak Hills will attend Meadow Park Middle School, and Five Oaks will remain the same with the exception that Aloha Huber would feed into Mountain View. Is there a second on that motion? Okay, seeing none. The third is Bonnie Slope, all of Bonnie Slope Elementary attend Cedar Park Middle School. Any second to that motion? Okay, seeing none. And then the last one is the motion is to move Westview, or I'm sorry, West Tualatin View to Timberland Middle School.
I second that.
Okay, so Divya seconds. All right, so I will go alphabetically in calling this question. It's been moved and seconded that the West TV Elementary School will feed Timberland and not Cedar Park. So going alphabetically, Abdul.
No.
Abhijit.
No.
Charisse.
No.
John.
No.
Divya, I'm sorry, I skipped over you. Divya?
Yes.
And Jason?
Yes.
Christy?
No.
Marnie?
No.
Matt?
No.
Mike?
No.
Michelle?
No.
Monica?
No.
Sean?
No.
Okay, the noes have it on that question. So moving on to Sharice's motion. Sharice's motion is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is to return and look at Stoller and make more adjustments to remove students from Stoller. Does that correctly summarize your motion? Thank you. Okay, I am looking for a second to that motion. Okay, seeing none. All right, so now I'm going to return to the map that you reached a preliminary recommendation on last week on the 8th, and we're going to have a vote on that one. So Robert, if you could please return the screen to the map from October 8th. Okay, so we see the map right here on this slide. So the question I'm going to call is, does the committee does the committee recommend this map to Superintendent Grotting for his consideration and action on this map? Okay, any questions about that question? Michelle?
So if we vote to recommend this map, do we have a say in how it is presented to the school board? In my opinion, I do not like this map, but I do think it's the best we could do with the limitations we were given. I still think it's a better idea for the district to consider redrawing all the boundaries. So, I mean, is there a way for us to say, this is the best we could do? We don't like it. Or maybe I'm the only one who doesn't like it, but you know what I mean?
Right. So you are welcome to provide any testimony you wish to the board. I recommend that you do it as an individual rather than the committee, because your recommendation is to the superintendent. So the superintendent will want to meet with you as a committee to talk about your recommendation, your misgivings, your strong supports, you know, all of that. So we will schedule that meeting after this evening with you. Abdul, I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, so early in the process, we were discussing about different maps, and we usually had some caveats that we attached to them. So do we still have that asterisk that we could put on any map and say, okay, we're accepting this, but these are like contingent upon ABC? Though I'm saying that we don't necessarily have those asterisks anymore, but I was just asking based on that question, that do we have that?
So what we have are, you know, in the staff report is just a broad summary of, you know, the considerations that the committee made and, you know, how the decision was made. We don't have caveats per se. You know, a caveat could be certainly the legacy program, and, you know, some of the things that we voted on earlier that apparently we're not doing anymore. So, you know, that's what we have. And so I can't say that we have any caveats that I can think of off the top of my head. Okay. All right. So I called the question. Does anybody want me to repeat it? Okay. So here we go. The vote the question being asked is, do you as a committee member recommend this map to the superintendent? Okay. And I am going to, let's see, we'll do it alphabetical, but we'll do it from the bottom up. So reverse alphabetical. Sean.
Yes.
Monica.
Yes.
Michelle.
Yes.
Mike.
Yes.
Matt.
Yes.
Marnie.
Yes.
Christy.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Jason.
No.
Divya.
Yes.
Charisse.
No.
Abhijit.
Yes.
Abdul.
Yes.
Okay, the yeses have it on that. So we have a recommendation on a map to the superintendent. The next question here, and Robert, if you could move the PowerPoint down, is about the legacy question. So we have in the report that we sent to you some information about legacy. We have talked about before, as our staff recommendation is offering it only to incoming 8th graders, so 7th graders this year. There was a proposal to include 7th graders, so current 6th graders that would be in 7th grade, and there was one for siblings. So what we said in the staff report, it depends on the school in terms of the impact on legacy. For example, Stoller would have a fairly sizable potential legacy, whereas another school like Whitford would have a very minor, modest legacy type opportunity. So in the staff report, I believe we said it was in the range between 100 and 170 students. And what I would like to do here is ask 3 questions. First one would be providing the legacy, the opt-in as you see in here, for students who will be entering the 8th grade. Then we would offer it to, the next motion would be to offer it to those that would be in 7th grade next year. And then we would get to siblings. The legacy question for number of students in that would be in 7th grade, if we have the 100 to 170 type impact, we have estimated that it would be approximately the same for that. In terms of figuring out eligible siblings, it was frankly, we didn't have enough time between meetings to calculate that. It's not a significant number. It is somewhat limited because while there are plenty of siblings, we weren't able to quickly figure out who would be in 8th grade and then also 6th or 7th grade. There might be siblings that are in 4th grade. So if you were to recommend that, that is part of our ongoing analysis that we would do prior to the superintendent making a decision. So does anybody have any questions, comments, or discussion they would like to have on the legacy program? Okay, first up appears to be Michelle.
Are this year's 6th graders, and I guess we won't know the answer to this. To me, it makes a difference if these 6th graders are ever going to go to school. So I'd be more inclined to offer legacy to 7th graders if they had attended in-person classes, made those bonds in their school but I think it's a completely different situation if everybody's on a computer and they're never, I don't think they're making a lot of friends on Zoom. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that really could impact our decision.
I am not about to be the person who says we are definitely going to school or we're definitely not going to school. The district has made the decision that based on the data from both Washington County and Multnomah County, that 4th through 12th grade will not be in class until the semester is over. So we will be in February, early February, when in-person instruction could start. There's no guarantee of that, of course. And there's, it's uncertain whether that would be a hybrid reopening, it would be a full reopening. We just don't know yet. So I can't give you a firm answer either way. It is, if we do return, it will be with, what would that be? 4.5 months time of in-person, of some shape of in-person learning. Okay, Abhijit.
Hey, Steve, on the legacy, can you elaborate what was the rationale in you recommending legacy only for the 8th grader? What are the things that you looked at? And I say that because, middle school is only 3-year program, and at most you can have 2 years of legacy. I want to understand what thought process went in your recommendation of this 8 only.
So our thought process was on several levels, but most importantly is in looking at Stoller in particular, is to create a meaningful impact to the number of students at that school as soon as we can. Recognizing that those students that will be in 8th grade have spent their 2 of their 3 years already there. So they have the relationships with other students, with staff, etc. So we wanted to be sure that those families that choose to remain at that school, and that applies to everybody, but particularly at Stoller, okay, we'll offer that, but then getting, that following year, so not next school year, but school year 22-23, we will be able to, make that meaningful deduction from the enrollment. The other reasons are, there's transportation, concerns. There's just administrative management concerns. When we did the high school, we offered 2 years, but that was mainly because we were not having a senior year at Mountainside. So that was, the difference with that. So we recommend that it's best for the students and for the district to keep it out that 1 year.
So here is where I'm struggling with, and maybe you can help on this. So you said one of the drivers was to get the relief as soon as possible. And I'm from North. I have known this Stoller overpopulation. It has been there for the last 4 years, I would say. Right? And it's not like it just came yesterday. Even when Timberland was built, it wasn't like this first day it was built, it was used to relieve Stoller overpopulation. Right? And even in this process, when we are going to end with recommendation in 2020, the district is going to apply that only in 2021. There is a 1-year delay. So the district's actions don't speak urgency, and I'm not debating, there must be legitimate reasons. After having gone through this process, I will not challenge that. But to say that to hasten the thing, we're not going to say no to the option of giving legacy. These 2 actions are not congruent, in my view. In the part that I myself haven't settled on this completely yet is, if you ask yourself, why would anybody opt in for legacy? I mean, nobody's going to opt in just for the sake of it. Right? As Michelle was pointing out, kids go to school, they form friends, and they have memories in that school building. Right? And they have spent either 1 year or 2 years, and they want to finish the last year or 2 years. This year, nobody has been in school. So the kids who are in 6th grade and who will be starting 7th grade in 2021, I want to think there'll be lesser population of those who would opt in for legacy. Right? So are we to say that we know so much about the process that we don't even want to give the option to opt in? And that feels like a reach, and that's the part I'm struggling a little bit. Thank you.
Okay. Jason, I think I saw your hand up.
Yeah, Abhijit, I got confused by what you said there at the end, Abhijit, but let me interpret it this way. I definitely agree I'm not sure what the rationale would be to deny the option. I think while we can all speculate as to what the difference is in the attachment to the school for this year, we also got to recognize that some of the attachments, I mean, especially when I think about all the reassignments that are going to happen now completely outside of Timberland and Stoller, that may just be about existing relationships they'd had formed going in. They may know somebody from their little league team and they want to continue to go to school with them and have the option to finish that out. Again, I'm in big favor of the idea of giving families the option to do the best thing for their child, that particular situation, really at any time, and right now, coming out of this circumstance especially.
Okay, thank you. Monica.
Okay. I kind of go back and forth on the matter. I see all the changes that we've made because I wrote them out school by school, like that. One of the handouts that was sent was easy for me to understand, like the magnitude of the changes that we've made with this map. And I do see the point from maybe the school district that providing too much legacy will be really impactful on bus routing and I think it's just bus routing. I don't know what other impacts it would have. So that makes me nervous. I think the fact that the kids have already been out of school as long as they have, I was a big proponent for giving as many kids legacy options as possible so that families were comfortable with this change. But given that we have been out of school so often, I'm kind of leaning the other way to kind of minimize the impact and stick with the current 7th graders, because I feel like the 6th graders that are there, they haven't even really been to their school yet, right? And but I do feel strongly about families that have one school and one, you know, I would like to keep the families together as much as possible. So I don't want to see one sibling going to one school and one sibling to go to the other unless that family chooses that for them.
Okay, thank you. Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I actually was the one that requested the information about the possibility and feasibility of 7th graders being added to the list of legacy students. Because of course, I think as most parents probably would, on its face, you want your kid to stay at the same school. But I believe we needed more information to make that decision. In reviewing the information that the district provided, it appears it's untenable to include 7th grade as much as I really want to do it. And in fact, it may even unwind the progress that we've made with reducing the capacity at Stoller in particular. So that's all I have.
Christy.
Yeah, I agree with Mike. I think that I just don't think it's tenable to have 7th graders included or incoming 7th graders included in legacy. And with respect to families, you know, I think families who want to keep their children together can attend their new neighborhood school. I think they do have that choice. And if they're choosing to have their 8th graders stay at their original boundary school, then that's the choice that they make.
Okay, thank you. All right, anybody else before I start calling the question? Abdul.
Given that the committee is kind of on different sides here, can we split the second option to vote separately for 6th graders and 7th graders?
Yes, we're going to do the legacy by grade.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so, Abhijit?
Just clarifying question. So legacy is an option to opt in, right? I think your report says by default, they're in new school. We are debating about whether to give the option so parents can decide to opt in. If we give the option, it doesn't mean they will actually take it. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So just to be clear, looking at Cedar Mill. So those students that live in the Cedar Mill attendance area attend Cedar Park right now. They can't, their new school is the Timberland area school. They can opt to have their child or their student remain at Cedar Park. That's what the legacy program is. It is opting in to stay at the former school. Okay. All right. So I'm going to call the question here. Does the committee wish to recommend to the superintendent that students that are currently in 7th grade and will be in 8th grade next school year, do you wish to allow them to have the option to be a legacy student at their current middle school? Okay. All right. I will start with, let's see. I'll start with Marnie this time.
Yes, I would recommend that for 8th grade.
Okay. Matt.
Yes.
Mike.
Yes.
Michelle.
Yes.
Monica.
Yes.
Sean.
Yes.
That's an interesting TV you have on. Abdul.
Yes.
Abhijit.
Yes.
Charisse.
Yes.
Divya.
Yes.
Jason.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Christy.
Yes.
Okay, that passes. Does the committee wish to recommend to the superintendent that the same legacy option program be offered to students who are currently in 6th grade, but will be in 7th grade next school year? Okay. All right, we will start with Michelle this time.
Yes.
Monica.
Yes.
Sean.
No.
It's Sean's turn. So Sean?
No.
No. Okay.
Oh, I apologize.
Sorry. Abdul.
Yes.
Abhijit.
Yes.
Charisse.
No.
Divya.
No.
Jason.
Yes.
John.
No.
Christy.
No.
Marnie.
No.
Matt.
No.
Mike.
No.
That's 8 no's. The no's have it. So last motion here is about the sibling legacy, and that is for those students that have an 8th grade, a student who will be in 8th grade next year, but a 6th grader or a 7th grader now will be would have attended that school, but are now elsewhere. So does the committee wish to offer legacy status to those students that have a sibling in 8th grade? And that would be applicable to those students that are entering 7th and 6th grade next year. Okay. So we'll just go alphabetically on this one.
Steve, I have a question. Sorry.
Yes.
Are we talking about how many siblings? What if there are like 3 siblings back to back, closely spaced? How far out does it extend?
So the way the question was asked, it was applicable only to those students that have an 8th grader this year or next school year.
Okay.
And it would apply to next year's 7th and 6th.
Okay, thank you.
So the legacy could continue to apply to the 6th grader through the time frame, but it would not apply to additional siblings, i.e., I think we called it the Von Trapp scenario or protocol.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Charisse. Oh.
Sorry. So just in that Von Trapp example, right? Because I think the whole point of us wanting to look at this is to ensure that parents aren't putting their children in different schools and trying to make that easier, right? So you have an incoming 8th grader only and an incoming 7th grader, and then maybe you have a 5th grader, right? So you can have that legacy student go in to 7th, and then that person goes to 8th, but the other person can't go, right? So you still end up in 2 middle schools, correct? Am I accurate there?
That's correct.
Okay, just making sure.
All right. So with the sibling legacy as I have described it, we'll call the vote right now. And as I said, we will go alphabetical here. Abdul.
Yes.
Abhijit.
Yes.
Therese.
Yes.
Divya.
Yes.
Jason.
Yes.
Dawn.
No.
Christy.
No.
Marnie.
Yes.
Matt.
No.
Mike.
No.
Michelle.
No.
Monica.
Yes.
And Sean.
No.
The yeses have it on that question. Okay. So Charisse talked about the Von Trapp scenario where it would be ongoing throughout the family. So out of the spirit of wanting to spend more time with you, we will ask this one last question and then you are done. So Michelle, you have your hand up.
I have a question. So now, didn't we just provide or recommend provide busing for 3 years?
That's correct.
Okay, just clarifying. That I guess that seems odd that, or maybe there were different reasons for not wanting the 7th graders. I guess it seems like those kind of would go together.
Craig?
Well, I just want to make it clear, the busing is only going to apply to the sibling. So it could be, we're supplying 4 buses for 4 different kids that live in 4 different areas to take 1 kid to school, what you just voted on. It doesn't apply to all the 7th graders and all the 6th graders. It only applies to students in that family. So if we literally could have 4 or 5 different buses taking 1 kid in.
So the expectation is it's going to be a much smaller number than all the 7th graders.
Yes, but it's going to be a bus. If they don't live by each other, then it's going to be separate buses for all, for 1 or 2 or 3 kids.
I think Michelle's point is, given that we're going to run those buses, it's, seems a shame not to be able to include the 7th graders.
We aren't going to do that because it will then, we'll be cutting off.
Well, no, I understand. We're not going to do it because we just voted no, but I think that's what Michelle was trying to raise.
But you've also precluded those kids again from an attendance point of view, right?
Okay. Let's see. Michelle, you just asked your question. So Christy.
Yeah, is it possible to, instead of offering siblings legacy status, could we offer them the ability to do an administrative transfer and then not provide transportation for those 4 students?
Mr. Struckmeyer, I would look to you to answer that question.
That does not currently, the policy that we have comes to us from the board and the AR that interprets that board policy. That is not one of the qualifying, sibling is not a qualifying reason for a student to be transferred right now. So that is not a way for that to happen.
Thank you. Charisse.
I'm sorry, Steve. Can we redo that vote and can you restate that question? Because the end result of that is not what I was expecting as far as the number of years we'd be busing for. So can we redo that? Is that possible? Because I may want to change my vote.
Is there anybody else who would like to reconsider that vote?
Yes.
Okay, so Marnie, John, and Sean have seconded that question. Okay. So restating the question, with the legacy program, allowing 8th grade students next year to legacy in, do you want to offer the same legacy, option to those families that have students that are siblings to that future 8th grader that starts in school year 21-22? Okay, is everybody solid on that? All right. Again,
Stephen, but
yes.
that's assuming the Von Trapp thing, right? That could go very far, or are we putting a limit?
We're putting the motion is to put a limit for the 7th and 6th graders next year. We'll do the Von Trapp question
after. Excellent.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. Abdul.
If we do have an 8th grader, right? We're saying a sibling that could be entering the 6th grade, right? That we could allow them. Then what happens the year after the 8th grader is left the middle school? Do we still provide the busing for that 6th grader all the way through their middle school, or?
Mr. Beaver?
Yes, because we've allowed them to do that, and yes.
Okay.
Because, yes.
All right.
And just remember that the families have the option of not having them. The 8th grader could change schools if they need to have the kids in the same school.
Okay.
Without a bus.
All right. So, hey, everybody, we don't want to have you talking all over each other here. So, Mike, you turn your microphone on. Did you have a question or comment?
No, it's just accident.
All right. Abhijit.
Actually, Steve, I wanted to go back and revisit the Springville boundaries, see if we can, is that okay with you?
I will not ask that question, and the motion dies because I don't want to ask the question. Abhijit.
Okay, so for siblings, is it possible that we can also look at limiting the transportation to certain number of years, or siblings get legacy but no transportation? Is that possible?
No, if we're giving them the option to attend there, then we are obligated to provide them with that transportation. If they are doing a admin transfer, then we're not obligated for that transportation.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Question is, do you, the committee, want to recommend to the superintendent that legacy option be provided to those families that have a student in 8th grade next school year and apply to their siblings that would be in either 7th or 6th grade next school year? Okay. All right, we did it alphabetical last time. We'll do reverse alphabetical this time. Sean,
No.
Monica,
Yes.
Michelle,
No.
Mike,
No.
Matt,
No.
Marnie,
No.
Christy,
No.
John,
No.
Jason,
Yes.
Divya,
No.
Charisse,
No.
Abhijit,
Yes.
and Abdul.
Yes.
The noes have it on that question. Okay, so based on that legacy vote, I'm not going to ask the Von Trapp legacy because siblings are not going to be, offered that legacy program. So it's at this point where I say we are done. Sorry, Jason.
I'll make the following motion that we recommend that the siblings we just considered, including the Von Trapp family scenario, be allowed to avail themselves of the administrative transfer process, which does not include transportation.
Okay, Mike.
I actually wanted to just say something completely irrelevant to what was just asked. I just wanted to thank the committee. It was a pleasure getting to know each and every one of you and working with you over the past year. I want to thank you, Steve, for your tireless work, and Robert as well, and everyone in the school district who I know. It's an incredibly difficult time for everyone, especially for our schools. So regardless of how the votes came out, I appreciate everyone's work.
Well, thank you very much for that, Mike. Okay, we have a motion to recommend that the AR be modified to allow admin transfer for students that are, would be legacy for that family. Do I have a second for that motion? Okay, it looks like Michelle has seconded that motion.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Isn't that available?
No, it's not available. As Mr. Struckmeyer just said, that having a sibling in a different school is not a
It's not a valid reason.
It's not a valid reason for an admin transfer.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay, Michelle?
But in that case, it would still be up to the discretion of the releasing and accepting principals, right? So it wouldn't be as much of a guarantee, but at least it's a pathway, a possibility, I guess.
It is a possibility, yes. Mike?
If you give an admin transfer, do you have to provide transportation too?
No. Mr. Beaver, is that correct?
Yes, sir, you are correct.
Okay, thank you.
Steve.
All right.
This is Carl.
Carl.
Just a point of clarification. Based on what Michelle stated, I just want to make sure that I understand what Jason is asking. And is that Jason talking about an administrative transfer? Michelle said it's not a guarantee. That is actually what our current practice is. So I'm not sure taking a vote on something that is current practice is appropriate.
So it's a recommendation from the committee to the superintendent to consider modifying the AR.
But it wouldn't be a modification based on Michelle's inquiry. Michelle's inquiry was, has to still be agreed upon by the sending and receiving principal. That is current practice.
That's correct.
So I just need to make sure that if we're talking about current practice, there's no purpose for a vote because that's already in our practice.
So I'm sorry if I'm being, Ken, you just turn your video on. So you want to chime in?
Carl, just to be clear, while everything is true that the sending and receiving principal must agree, then the AR provides guidance of the reasons that are valid, and sibling is not one of those reasons that is valid.
Okay, thank you. So this would be the exception that you're asking for, Jason. Is that clear? It's for specifically sibling reason. Okay, thank you. I just didn't want to add another layer on top of something.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, I understand. Okay. So the question, the motion is, and we got the second. Charisse.
I think Christy had her hand up before me, unless it wasn't meant to be up, Christy.
I was just going to second the motion. I wasn't sure if it was seconded or not.
Yeah, it was seconded. Charisse?
Excellent. How often are administrative transfers granted? And I don't want to give anyone in the community false hope if we are able to put something like this in. How often are they granted?
Mr. Streckmeyer, you want to field that one?
The knowledge I have might be limited to middle school because I'm not aware of all the quantity at other levels. I would say that generally speaking, families are very good about only submitting applications that meet the criteria. And then generally, if they've already met the criteria before they apply, the approval rate is quite good. So the ones that are rejected generally would be ones either that the form says straight there that they don't meet the criteria and yet they submitted it, or that the receiving school lacks the capacity to take additional students. So for example, an application to Stoller today would be rejected because there is not room at Stoller for kids outside the boundary.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, so question is, recommend to the superintendent that the AR governing admin transfers be amended to include siblings for the middle school boundary adjustment. Correct? Okay. So we'll start with Abhijit on this one.
Thank you for the honor. Yes.
Charisse.
Yes.
Divya.
No.
Jason.
Yes.
John.
No.
Christy.
Yes.
Marnie. Yes, okay. Matt.
No.
Mike.
Yes.
Michelle.
Yes.
Monica.
Yes.
Sean.
No.
And Abdul.
Yes.
Okay, the yeses have it on that particular item. That is our final vote as a committee. And it's now at this point where I express my great gratitude to all of you for sticking with us for over a year and doing some really heavy lifting. All of your comments, your concerns, your angst, all of it is well earned and well deserved and absolutely spot on. This is not an easy job, and it's even tougher when we have people of so many viewpoints and so many thoughts and so many values, and you've done a great job. This has been one of the best committees I've ever worked with in the 30 years I've been doing this. So you all should. If we were in a meeting, I'd ask you all to stand up and, you know, stand to the right, and we'd all pat each other on the back. But I really do appreciate all your efforts, and thank you so much. And to the people who are watching and who have participated throughout our meetings, a big thank you to you as well. We need everybody to participate in this. This is not something, this is a public process and the public needs to be involved. So thank you very much for your participation, your sticking to it, your comments, and your testimony. So everyone, thank you very much. This concludes the Middle School Boundary Adjustment Advisory Committee's work. And I will be sending you an email here shortly, hopefully tomorrow, but perhaps next week, on kind of final things. And with that, we are done. Thank you.
Nice.
Hey, Steve, can I add one last question? Sorry.
Sure.
Not to have everyone wait for another 5 minutes, but
we're done.
Abdul's, no, I'm not floating a motion, so everybody relax.
Okay.
So, Abdul's question sort of brought this. In the March 12 meeting, you started off by giving us a clear direction from the board on use of portables. That said, no middle school is to use portables as source of capacity. I read your report, it is not there. And the March 12 meeting also does not have in that packet. So just for making sure that it is part of the public record, can you add that in the both in the report and as well including the packet that's given to the public?
Yes.
Thank you.
We can do that.
And sorry to hold you all up for one moment.
Great. If I could have the city staff hang for just